I think it's time to introduce Bruce. So Colonel Bruce Hurd is a retired 30-year Air Force tanker pilot who recently wrote an Amazon bestseller memoir that focuses on overcoming traumatic events in life. In the book, he talks about what he learned from leadership experience that many of us have had. But as you know, every experience as a battalion or squadron or group or brigade commander is unique. Talks about some of the guiding principles on how to write and how to lay this out, and then how this has helped him throughout his career in the Air Force and afterwards. Recently started this new career as an author coach, and in any case, he's off and on his way, and in fact, some of his profits goes to disabled American veterans. So in any case, what I'm going to do now, please give a warm Army and Navy welcome. I can hear your claps already to Colonel Bruce Hurd and crew. And Bruce, it's all yours.
Thank you, Tom. And thanks to the Army and Navy Club and all of you who are spending your time with me this evening on our Zoom call. I can hear the virtual clapping all the way here in San Diego. I'd like to begin tonight by reading a short passage from my book. It takes place in West Texas in 1978. I was a 23-year-old student pilot completing my night solo ride in the Air Force T-38 Advanced Trainer. After I completed an uneventful navigation leg around the city of Lubbock, Texas, I returned to Reese Air Force Base to do practice landings before calling it a night. As I approached the airfield, I requested authorization to fly an overhead pattern to a touch-and-go landing. The first aircraft to return to base that night, I passed above the takeoff end of the runway going 300 miles per hour. I pulled the throttles back to idle power and made a hard 180-degree right turn to set myself up on the downwind leg, reducing my speed, configuring my aircraft for landing, and getting enough displacement from the runway so that when I made my final 180-degree turn toward the runway, I would roll out on final approach, lined up to land the aircraft. Easy. I had done this hundreds of times already, even at night. Except things were not what they seemed. No one knew about the severe wind shear between the wind at traffic pattern altitude, 1,500 feet in the air, and the wind reported at ground level. On the ground, the wind went straight down the runway. At altitude, a 50-mile-an-hour crosswind pushed me closer to the airfield while I flew my downward leg. This meant my displacement from the runway became smaller and smaller as I set myself up for my final turn for landing. It also meant the 50-mile-an-hour crosswind would quickly become a tailwind as I made my turn. I would lose 1/3 of my airspeed in seconds. Since I hadn't flown a night approach on this runway, I didn't have any ground wind references. The lighted electrical shack and the road intersection I had been using as visual checkpoints were useless. Still, I had general guidelines for where I should place myself, and I used those. Those guidelines, though, didn't account for strong crosswinds. As I reached my 30-second timing point past the end of the runway, I felt confident. I put down my landing gear and banked hard to the right. I turned my head around to pick up my aim point as I descended rapidly. The aim point is the spot on the runway that pilots use to make a safe landing. It's not marked on the runway. Instead, each pilot must determine his or her aim point depending on the type of plane they're flying, the weather, the conditions and length of the runway, and a host of other things. Seconds ticked by. Finally, about halfway around the turn, I saw my aim point on the runway. I instantly knew things were terribly wrong. I was way too low. Worse than that, I realized my bank angle was far too steep. I quickly focused on my angle of attack indicator on top of the instrument panel. It was glowing bright red. My stalled out wings were no longer providing the lift I needed to stay airborne. I knew I was in a desperate situation. I immediately threw my throttles into full afterburner and raised my landing gear to reduce drag. Because I had started my turn much too close to the runway, I had unknowingly maneuvered too aggressively, attempting to make things look right for the landing. I cross-checked my vertical velocity indicator and I saw it pegged at 4,000 feet per minute going down. My altimeter showed me plummeting through 1,000 feet above the ground. I wasn't flying anymore. I was falling out of the sky. It would only be a matter of seconds before I hit the ground at over 100 miles per hour and exploded in a fireball. My heart was in my throat. I carefully leveled the wings to increase lift. I needed to allow the plane to continue its descent to regain speed. If I tried to pull back on the stick too soon, I would lose what little lift I still had, and it would go deeper into the stall and crash. As I sank into the unlit darkness of the field leading to the runway, I saw the runway lights get flatter and flatter. I had to remain disciplined and continue my descent at full power, just to give the plane time to accelerate to minimum climb speed. At one point, I noticed the lights at the far end of the airfield weren't visible anymore because the small rise midway down the runway blocked them. The airfield was on a slight plateau and I was going below runway altitude. I knew I could hit the ground any second. As I mentioned, what I just read was an excerpt from chapter 1 of my book, Aim Point, an Air Force Pilot's Lessons for Navigating Life. For the vast majority of you who have not read my book, I will not tell you how things turned out. You'll have to buy the book to find out if I crash and die that night or not. I started my presentation this way because I want to demonstrate to each of you that you have the potential of becoming a published author. I didn't start writing until after I turned 60, and even then, I didn't devote serious time to it until just a few years ago. Today, at age 65, I not only have a best-selling book to my credit, I've already started my second book, and I have a thriving business helping first-time authors from a wide variety of backgrounds write, edit, and publish their books. Of all the many professional experiences I've had throughout my life, both inside and outside of the Air Force, writing and publishing a book has absolutely been one of the most rewarding and enjoyable I've ever had. Today I'm going to talk about what you gain from becoming authors. I'll also describe the method I used, which can help you achieve your goal of becoming an author. And I'll touch on several different ways you can help make your book interesting and exciting for people who aren't even familiar with your subject matter. However, the most important takeaway I want you to receive from today is this. You have an amazing book inside of you. Your presence here at this teleconference is testimony to that. Your family, your friends, and people you haven't even met yet are going to benefit tremendously from reading what you write. And finally, regardless of what method you use or who you work with, now is the perfect time to get started. So I'd like to begin by letting you get to know me a little bit. I'll talk about my background. I was born and raised in the Bay Area of California. I went to Homestead High School, which some of you may actually know that Steve Jobs, CEO of Apple, founder and CEO of Apple, went to the same high school. And in fact, he was a class ahead of me. Sadly, though, I didn't ingratiate myself with him, and I missed the opportunity to get in on the ground floor of all that he was doing. After Homestead, I got an ROTC, an Air Force ROTC scholarship to the University of California at Berkeley. And for those who have been around for a while, might be surprised that Berkeley actually had an ROTC in the mid-70s. And yes, it was a bit of a challenge going through there on a military scholarship. After getting commissioned in 1977, I went to Air Force pilot training at Reese Air Force Base in 1978, graduating in December 1978. and I was assigned to fly KC-135s up at K.I. Sawyer Air Force Base in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And when I started in the Air Force, especially after I got that assignment, which was not really where I wanted to go, as beautiful as it is, it was extraordinarily isolated. And as a young single lieutenant, that wasn't what I had wanted. That wasn't where I wanted to be. However, what I found was that despite my wanting to just serve out my time and do well, I wanted to do well, but I did not intend to stay in the Air Force. I expected I would do my service duty commitment and then fly for the airlines or do something else after 6 years. What I found, though, was that I really enjoyed being an Air Force pilot. I enjoyed being an Air Force officer. I enjoyed the mission of the Air Force, and mostly I enjoyed the people I worked with. And one opportunity led to another, and one fun assignment led to another. And 16 assignments, and 30 years later, I retired from the Air Force in 2007. After retiring from the Air Force, I reinvented myself and became a software development program manager at a large technology company here in San Diego. I did that for the next 8 years, and in 2015, as my daughter, our youngest, finished college and finished getting her teaching credential, my wife Joanne and I looked at each other and looked at the 12-hour days I was putting in and the 8-hour weekends I was devoting to the company and doing my work. We decided that really what we wanted to do was to go do something else, do something fun, do something that didn't involve working all the time. And so we sold our house. That was the only debt we really had. We sold because we had been saving, and of course I had my Air Force retirement. And sold our house, put our belongings in long-term storage, and we moved to Hawaii for 7 months and went to Maui and just had a fun time. Eventually coming back here to San Diego, and I'm still part-time with the company. I'm a consulting employee with the company that I was with, and just enjoying life. One of the reasons besides the extraordinary workload I was doing, one of the reasons that we decided that I should go to part-time was that I also had a real desire to write. And when we were in Hawaii, I started writing basically stories. It was they were Air Force focused for the most part. They were events and people that I appreciated in the Air Force, and it was just a collection of stories, no real themes associated with it. And I enjoyed writing. It was great, but it wasn't, after a year and a half or so, I realized that I wasn't really getting anywhere with that. It was fantastic. I didn't necessarily see a book in my future, but what happened next was fantastic, in that my wife, watching me do all this, did some research, and she found a writing retreat that advertised write your book in a weekend. And that sounded great. The promise of being able to jumpstart my book writing and to write it in a weekend really was enticing, and we both signed up. She is writing children's books. And so we drove from San Diego to Sedona, Arizona, and spent the one weekend writing intensely for 10 or 11 hours a day. And by the end of the weekend, I in fact had a 25,000 word core book that I felt that I could build upon to a much longer, more standard sized book. I had the basics. I had really what I wanted to say as part of my core story. The amazing part of the weekend, though, was that the retreat was not just writing. There are techniques, and I can talk about this in the Q&A, or we can email, or however you want to do it, but there are techniques that they taught us in this writing retreat whereby we get out of our thinking mind and get into our more creative mind, and write from the creative mind. And I can talk a little bit more about that in the Q&A if you'd like. It was highly effective, and I was amazed at how, as I'm writing my book, I was recalling conversations that I had had 30 or even 40 years ago, and I was feeling the emotions that I associated with many of these events and people that I was writing about. One of the other big surprises was that as I started my writing, my intention was to focus on doing more of the same, kind of more writing about events and people from the Air Force. And there certainly was some of that. But where I kept being drawn to was writing about different traumatic events in my life. I kept, as I would be writing about one subject, I would start writing about those events. And specifically, these events, some of these events were the fact that my mother was an alcoholic, and her alcoholism lasted until my early 30s. So all my childhood and much of my young adult life, we dealt with my mother's alcoholism and all of the embarrassment and the shame that caused. And as a young captain in the Air Force, I got a divorce. It was a very painful divorce, as if there's any other kind, but a painful divorce. And that carried a lot of emotion with it as well. And a third event that came to mind that surprised me. I hadn't thought about this for a long, long time, but it was in sixth grade. There was a teacher, my sixth grade teacher, who we all loved. It was a man at a time when there weren't many men in the teaching profession, and he publicly, purposefully raged on me and humiliated me, and that left an impression that lasted my whole life, and it was a shameful experience. So those things came up, and I decided that I would just go with what was coming up, and I decided to write on those subjects, those topics that I was drawn to, and I'm really glad I did. Tom mentioned about the importance of writing as therapy, and this absolutely positively, I'll talk about this in a little bit, but this absolutely positively was my experience. So I got home from the retreat. It was I had 25,000 words, and the retreat was fantastic. And there were a couple of follow-up meetings that we had, but there wasn't really any sort of accountability or coaching that went on beyond the retreat. It was you're on your own now, so good luck. And after the retreat, I felt a little bit abandoned because there was a lot more that I wanted to write and I wanted to organize and what have you. And I was kind of on my own. And I was fortunate in that I have a very good friend from childhood who is a published author. He's journalism as his career, but he's also an author. And my sister-in-law is a motivational speaker and a best-selling author as well. And I went to them and I asked for their advice on how to improve my book, and they gave me some great suggestions. And I also went back to the gentleman that ran the retreat, just a wonderful guy, real pleased with him, and signed up for a special program where he read my book and gave me some suggestions as well. It was a one-time deal, and that helped a lot. But there I was, and with my 25,000 word draft. And so for the next year and a half, I expanded my book. I included some of the writing that I had before, some of the stories that I had written previously, And I organized it, and I created what was a thematic book. It wasn't done, it was loosely chronological, but it was mainly based on themes. The four parts of the book being courage, courage, compassion, integrity, and trust. And all of the chapters that I wrote fit into those categories. As I finished, I decided that I really needed to have a forward-looking piece as well. And so I wrote about what I call the aim point principles, hence the name of the book. And being an aim point, what we use as a pilot. And the aim point principles, aim point is an acronym standing for appreciation, integrity, make a decision, play, set objectives and goals, inspiration, nurture, and trust. And those are 8 guiding principles that I've used in my role as a leader in the Air Force, and also when I've come upon times when I needed to reinvent myself, going from one position to another, or one entire career to another. And so at the end, once I did all of that, organizing, rewriting, editing, took a year and a half, and the book actually ended up being 80,000 pages. So it was about 3 times as big as what I had started with. I also, something else that took a little bit of time, I also decided that I wanted to make it into an audiobook as well. So I did some research about who was highly rated here in the area. I found a husband and wife team that did this work, and I did the narration and created it in audiobook format as well. After launching the book a year ago this month, I started doing book signing events, and had a lot of fun doing that. And I not only would speak, but I would also answer questions. And typically the first question I would get is, so are you a fighter pilot? And to which I would respond, well, if you include tanker pilots as fighter pilots, then yes, I am. So after the realization set in that, in fact, I was not a fighter pilot, and the disappointment was gotten over, almost always the questions that I received were about how did you write and edit and publish your book. There's a lot of people who are very interested in doing writing, editing, and publishing. And in fact, there was a survey taken years ago I think it was 8 years ago, by a publishing company that found that 80% of American adults feel they have an amazing book within them. And of that 80%, 5% actually start writing a book. And of that 5%, 5% finish the book, and yet an even smaller percentage publish. So a small fraction ever actually publish their books, while many, many write them. And I would even go so as far as to say that in the military community, of which we all are, that number has to be a lot closer to 100%. So there's a lot of people that want to write the book, but not many that do. So right now, what I'd like to talk about is reasons to become a writer. There's quite a few. I'm going to just touch on 4 of them that I think are the most important. One big reason to become a writer, become a published writer, is the self-confidence that you gain from actually finishing and publishing a book. It does require effort. It does require commitment. And if you can write a book and publish it, you've done an amazing thing, and it's something that's permanent, something you can point to, something you can hold in your hand. And the self-confidence we gain from that is amazing. A second reason is credibility. By writing a book, you're putting your thoughts down on paper. If your book relates to a business you're doing or a field that you're interested in, you have that much more credibility because you put the time and effort and oftentimes research into putting your book together. And that gives you a lot of credibility, not just in your professional field, but also in within your family and friends. You have credibility because you wrote a book. Additionally, becoming a published author is a great way to provide service for others. Many of us want to be of service to others. By writing a book, we can inspire, we can educate, we can help so many others that would really benefit from what we have to offer. The last big reason that people, that I believe benefits us by becoming a writer is something Tom alluded to, and that's therapy. As I described, writing about my traumatic experiences. And one thing I want to point out here, I forgot to during my discussion, but as I wrote about these traumatic events, it was important for me to write about them, to shine a light on them, taking away the shame associated with these events, but also to describe them from a non-victim perspective. I'm not a victim. I never have been a victim. And even these traumatic events, there are lessons that I learned from those. And in my book, as I described different events, particularly as I was a commander, I applied those lessons to those situations that I found myself in. So that therapy, that writing that book really helped me rid myself, or at least deal with, bring out the light associated with those specific events in my life. And as I coach different authors now, I find that many of them, as they write their books, will touch on individual uncomfortable or very painful events, and then they move on to another topic. And part of my job as a writing coach is to call them on this and to ask them, is to identify these events or people, and to encourage them to write more about this, get to the bottom of what this is, explain this further, because it is a glaring hole in your book. And I can give some examples of that. I don't want to take up too much time with specific examples, but I do have one gentleman in particular that gained a tremendous amount by examining his extraordinarily painful divorce and family breakup from years prior that he was a result of, or he caused it. Therapy is critical. It's important for all of us to look at these traumatic events in our life, to shine a light on them, and to heal. And that's what therapy is about. It's all about healing. So with all these great reasons, with the interest out there in writing and all of these great reasons to write your book, why do so many people not write their books? And there's a lot of reasons. There are a lot of good reasons. It's difficult to set aside time. Often people have a lack of organization and format as they look at their book, and that can intimidate them from even getting started. Many people have multiple books in their mind, but they need to decide on what they actually want to write. And that can be difficult. That can be intimidating as well. And this group, not so much, but what I found in some of the other people I work with, the non-military people I work with, is that it can often be difficult to focus effort. They sit down to do their writing, and then shiny object comes by, or they start writing and their mind starts wandering, and it's pretty haphazard. Those are excuses. Good reasons, not pointing the finger at anybody, because all of these are very legitimate. What this all boils down to, though, is our fears that we have. And all of us have these fears. I certainly had them as I started. We fear starting and not finishing. What are people going to think if I start this one and don't finish it? What am I going to think of myself? Uh, a big fear is, what if I write this and people won't like what I'm writing? That's a big fear, and that intimidates a lot of people from even trying to start or certainly not finishing. Writing a book can also be seen as being much too hard and a lot of effort. And as we look at it, the question is, do we really want to put the time and effort into it? It looks really hard. It is hard. That's a fear. And then the whole editing and publishing process. When I dove into that myself, it was a real voyage of discovery. And as I looked at it before I started, it really looked intimidating. There's a lot of unknowns about editing and publishing. That can be a fear as well. And what this all boils down to is a fear of failure. The fear that we're not going to finish, that we're a failure, that will be seen as a failure, and what will that look like? That's a very real fear. So how do we overcome these fears? There's 4 different steps I'd like to point out. One is, and this really is the first step, is making a commitment to succeed. And this is making a commitment to yourself, especially, but also letting others know that you're doing this and that you're making a commitment. By publicly pronouncing and internalizing this commitment to yourself and to others, you are taking this huge first step in becoming a successful published author. The second step is becoming disciplined and organized about your writing process. And by disciplined, I mean setting aside time, hopefully each day, but if not each day, setting aside time each week and sticking with it to devote to your writing. And as you set aside that time and start your writing, make sure that you're organized so that you don't use that valuable time getting yourself organized, and pretty soon your time's up and you haven't really accomplished much during your daily or weekly session. A third important step in overcoming these writing challenges is being open to the process. And I described that a little bit as I talked about what occurred to me during my retreat. And by being open to the process and letting your creative side take over, you may not go exactly where you thought you were going to go. And if your mind takes you to places that you want to write about, of course, if it takes you to places that you hadn't thought about or are intended to go, but are inspired to go, just go there with it. See what develops. See what you write. See what you recall. This is important. This is allowing yourself to be open to what your creative side and what your inner being wants you to write about. And then the last step after committing, becoming more disciplined, and being open to the process is a decision. How do you want to proceed, and where to get help? You can do this at a retreat like I did. You can do this by yourself. Obviously, a lot of very successful authors have done this all by themselves, and that's perfectly fine. What I would suggest is that be open to getting help. Get others to look at what you're writing. Get others to help you in terms of editing, formatting. Seek out leads in terms of professional editors or publishing. You can do self-publishing, but there's a lot of, and I self-published, just to make it clear. There is a lot of knowledge to be gained about self-publishing if you want to do something like that. But decide how to proceed and be open to getting help. And if you have places to start getting help, research them first. Don't expect to do this completely solo and come out with something that's really great, because maybe that's not what's going to happen. And finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about 5 common challenges. And I want to leave time for questions and answers. So I'll just briefly touch on these, but I can expand on them or anything else that we've talked about as part of this, as part of my presentation. The biggest challenge that a lot of writers have is writing with emotion. And the reason that people read books, you know, other than reference books, perhaps, where they want to gain knowledge, but the reason that people read 90 whatever % of the books that are in circulation is that they want to feel emotion. And when a reader purchases a book, it's almost like a contract between the reader and the author. And the reader is saying, I will devote time to reading what you've produced. And the author is saying, I have written something that is worthwhile, that you will connect with. And the way that we connect writer and reader is through the expression of emotion. And what I find with a lot of us, men and women, military and non-military, is that people are often reluctant to express emotion because it can be painful. It can be painful, and you open yourself up to it's vulnerability. So make sure as you write your books, you're writing with emotion. The other common challenges, scene setting. It's important to set a scene. Often we are very familiar with our material, so as we step through the events that are happening, we assume that people can envision the scene that is being developed, and in fact, that's often not the case. So spend time developing your scene. And it's not just visual, it's smells, it's what this feels like, things like that. Character development is huge. Make sure that your characters are 3-dimensional characters, and that especially if they are important to your story, make sure you dive a little bit deeper into them and what makes them tick and who they are and what they're all about. Developing themes and structure is very important as well. And as I told you about starting my book, I had a lot of different stories. They weren't really themed. No one would have wanted to read that. Once I got serious about writing my book and I put them in themed categories, and it was in kind of an overall leadership and reinvention arc, it became a lot more interesting because people could tell that I was leading them someplace as opposed to just talking random stories. And then finally, one of the real interesting things is that I found that people often will switch subjects and themes and time and places, and they don't tell the reader. And that can be really confusing. So as you switch, as you're doing your writing and you switch between times and locations, make sure you keep the reader oriented. And in fact, in my book, because it's not chronological, it's more thematic, and I skip around between different places and locations and jobs and things like that. I needed to orient the reader to that, and in fact, I included an appendix at the back of my book that outlined my entire chronology of assignments and dates and things like that, so that if people had questions, they could refer back to that to see where was it, what was he doing, what was he doing, where was he now. So I know we've covered a lot of ground, and I appreciate your attention. I look forward to answering any questions you might have about the writing process I've described, the challenges new authors face, and any other topic you'd like to discuss. Thank you.
Hey, Bruce, thank you very much. So let me ask you a practical question. So was your book self-published? I mean, did you go through a publishing company? How did you make that contact once you have some product?
So yeah, so actually there's 2 ways to do this. I'll explain real briefly that you can go through a publishing house, And in a lot of ways, that's the easiest way to do this, because it's they take care of the editing and the formatting, and they design a cover for you and all that stuff. And there are publishing houses that you can pay them and they will do all this stuff if you want to pay them. That could be a little pricey, but it's a good way to go on the churn out a professional product for you. And if you don't want to go through with what they call, that's called a vanity publishing house, where they'll publish anything you want to publish, and they'll make it look nice. If you have a desire to go with a regular publishing house that is publishing because they see a lot of popularity, and they see your book as something that they might want to market, some of the real challenge there is getting discovered. So if the audience here, if an author has a book that is that falls in that category, and you get an offer from a publishing house, you discover it and you get an offer, then that's fantastic. The one thing I would be cautious about is that when you sign with a publishing house, your book becomes their property at that point. And so, and they tend to have 90% of the effort on 10% of their product. So they'll market the heck out of the small group of books that they see as being really hot topics, and the other 90% are kind of there waiting on whatever timeline they have, and they may never get promoted, and the author doesn't really have any control over that. Mm-hmm. So they're a downside too, but it can be really positive, and I would not discourage anyone from doing that. Just be aware of some of the pitfalls. I did self-publishing, and that was even at the 2-year timeline I had, it can go quicker, but it's a lot quicker than publishing houses. Typically, those take years to go through, unless it's your Harry Potter or something like that. And so I did that, and so doing that, there was a bit of a voyage of discovery. I found a young lady I contracted with to do the book cover. I had an editor that went through and did, he does this for a living, found that guy, he did that. I found another editor that did the formatting into the different formats that Amazon uses a different format than everybody else. And so I had to have it done in 2 formats. So it's a little more complicated, but if you self-publish, you'll get published. You'll do it, it will get done, and you have more control over it, and you get the royalties from it yourself. So there's benefits to both. But I decided to self-publish, and I learned a lot during that whole process. Plus, I made connections with people who do that type of stuff.
Okay. So Father Tim Cochran mentioned, comment, not question. Your point, writing about traumatic experiences helps you leave them behind. I had not thought about that. My experience has been returning to the place when the traumatic event occurred has allowed me to let the yoke of that negative experience rise from my shoulders. The place wasn't really as scary as I remember. But our points are the same: facing the negative past and leave it behind, whether by writing or by returning to that place. So just an observation. So
and these are not exclusive actions. And I didn't catch the name, but I congratulate that individual to returning to the place. Writing can be helpful as well, very helpful, as I described.
So Bob Volkak mentions, Bruce, you described 4 reasons why one might write a book. Which one was the most important for you?
That's a good question. I would actually say the therapy piece of it was most important. The rest of them are great, but I was drawn to the therapeutical aspects of writing the book. It's not a coincidence that I started at the retreat writing one thing and I went completely in a different direction. That's what I was drawn to. That as I got out of my thinking mind and went into my creative self, that's what I was drawn to, and that's where I ended up, and I'm very glad I did. And just on a side note, I talk about fear and fear of what others will think. One of the fears I had was, as I was talking about my writing about my mother and the whole alcoholic experience. I have 4 brothers and sisters, and I kept wondering about, oh my gosh, what are they going to think about this? Because one of the big rules we had in our family was we don't talk about it to anybody. We didn't even talk amongst each other. Mm-hmm. And what I found was that, my brother and my sister were very supportive. My oldest brother and my sister were very supportive, and the other 2 were rather indifferent, which is fine. No one got on my case. So that was a huge relief. But also I had a lot of friends that came to me who had similar experiences growing up and what have you. So all of these imagined fears in my mind that I had associated with writing about this and publishing it for the world to see were just that. They were imagination. They didn't come to pass. And very few people, very, very few that I received pushback from, at some point I kind of questioned, well, how much of these people really on my side or not?
Okay. So another question, is there a formula or ratio or recommendation, rule of thumb, for the number of photos and illustrations to include in a book?
That's an excellent question. That's really good. And I included photos in my book. And there's different ways you can do photos. I'm sure you've seen the books that have the photos in a central section on glossy pages. What you get there is high quality photos. And you can do that. It costs a little bit more, but you get a section of your book that has high quality photos. The photos are important. What I chose to do was to incorporate digital images. For example, I have 42 chapters in my book. At the beginning of each chapter, there was a photo that related to the book, or related to that chapter, rather. And so the quality of it's a good picture. You can see what I intend to see, and it's black and white and all that. But it really adds to the story because you can see the people, you can see the plane, you can see what I'm trying to impart as a central message of the chapter. So I don't know if there's a ratio. I had, my book is 280 pages, and I had, between these different parts and the different chapters, I probably had 50 photos in there. And I don't know if that's, so it's 1 every 5 pages. I wouldn't do more than 1 photo per page, just because then all of a sudden it becomes a kind of a photo book. But it's up to you. And I hate to even give too many rules on this because it depends. It depends on what type of book you're writing. If it's a book that requires a lot of graphics, not just photos, but graphics or photos to make it clear, then do what you think is best.
Okay, thanks. So research is always a significant issue. Your book contains a lot of details, and so how do you recall those specifics? What do you rely on, or is it just memory, or do you have notes, journal?
So that's an excellent question. So I'm going to talk just a hair about the writing process. The key to the writing process is that I learned at the retreat, and this is what I teach at my retreats. And the difference between my retreat and the one I went to is that I follow up. I have follow-up opportunities with writers so that they don't feel abandoned. But during the writing weekend, the key is to isolate yourself from any sort of distractions. Leave your phone someplace else, and to put on a headset and listen to some alpha wave type music, so that you're not even getting distracted by listening to something else. And start writing as quickly as you can. And I handwrite, but you can do it on a laptop. And just start writing what comes to your mind. And as you write, you'll find, at first, happened with me, happens with most everybody, is that I'm just writing, lazy dog jumps over the quick brown fox. So, it was just kind of not a lot making sense, but after a relatively short time, things start coming to you and you just write it. And the key is to just keep writing as fast as you can. Don't think about it, just write what you're writing, and don't go back and try and organize or edit or research. This gets to the questioner's question. Don't try and go back and do research. If there's something that you need to research, just make an asterisk or something and just keep writing. And that way you stay in your creative mind and you can do the research later. And just to reiterate something, what I wrote at the retreat, yes, it was the core of the book, but when I got to actually sitting down and editing it, I moved stuff around. I was redundant. Some sections I used the same adjective too much because I was writing too quickly, and so I changed that around. So there's editing that goes on afterwards to make it more interesting and not be so repetitive. Research is one of those things you do afterwards. Get your book down, get your story down, and then you do the research. There'll be time for that, the editing period at the after.
Okay, so I got another question here, but before I go there, I'm just going to mention again that Bruce has a Zoom retreat 3 and 4 October, and to get a hold of him to see if you have any questions on that or if you're interested in that, his email is bruce.e, and that's bruce.e.hurd, Hurd, @gmail.com. Did I say that right, Bruce?
Yes, that's correct. I actually have 2 emails, but that's one of them. And the other
Got
one is the one I mentioned previously, colonelbrucehurd@gmail.com. This is all good. I respond to either one. I'm good.
I copied and pulled one, and that's why I got a question on there that said, hey, could you go over his email again? And I used the one you and I have been conversing
Certainly.
with.
So it's bruce.e.hurd, Hurd, @gmail.com, or Colonel Bruce Hurd, with Colonel abbreviated, all one word, no periods, @gmail.com. I'm just going to talk about the retreat 1 second, just so people know what this is about, so they have an idea whether they might be interested. It's 2 days. It's 2 full days of writing. There's a couple of Zoom sessions ahead of that to prep whoever's going to be attending. And during those sessions, we practice what I call inspired connected writing, and that's with a headset, and I provide the music and everything, and prep the authors that go to this, prep their area so they can practice writing in their area. And we have a couple of prep sessions for that, and which is practice writing. And I talk about the importance of writing, and some of the stuff I cover is what I covered tonight, but we get to know each other, and then we get ready for the Saturday, Sunday, all-day events. Those happen, and then after that, a week after, and then the following week, we have follow-up sessions where I see how people are doing, see if they have any questions. I go over some of the tips that I just covered at this Zoom session. And I typically offer one free one-on-one, 1-hour counseling where they provide me with a sample of their writing, and I give them some feedback on what they're writing, and I provide thoughts. That's no obligation. It's all included with the retreat. And then if they want to go further and do one-on-one weekly coaching, then that's a separate issue. But I've gotten quite a good reaction from that, some good responses. And I'm working with a whole bunch of authors right now and doing that exact same thing.
So a question for Tom Wing had was, do you find writers' conference have been used, and if so, are there any particular ones?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. I actually go to the Southern California Writers Conference, which happens between Anaheim. It's every 6 months, and this is pre-COVID, so I'm not sure what's going on now. But in February, it happened here in San Diego. I went to that, and then sometime in the fall, I think it was supposed to happen in Anaheim. Anyway, those are very useful. The one I go to is a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and that's really good for networking. It's really good for finding out techniques about writing in different situations. They have a lot of fantasy writers. They have a lot of romance writers. So if you're wanting to write something in that area, that's the place to be, because you can communicate with each other and network. And then there's also a lot of business people. And for my second book, I interviewed with a couple of book agents. I provided them my first book, and there's some interest in maybe going with a publisher for the second one. We'll see. That's a very competitive and what have you. But at least I had a chance at the Writers Conference to talk to them. So there's a lot of goodness in Writers Conferences. I'd recommend it. But a Writers Conference is not about writing your book. A Writers Conference is about the craft of writing and the business side of writing. The ones I've been through.
Yeah, that was my confusion. That was my confusion. So very intriguing, though. So Charlene Donovan has a question. Are there challenges writing nonfiction different from fiction or memoirs? And how do we know if our personal story will matter to a general audience?
Well, I would say that anyone listening to this this Zoom call, your personal story will matter to a general audience. The key is to make it understandable, because what loses a general audience, a couple things will lose a general audience. One is if you have a Sergeant Friday, nothing but the facts writing style, where it's just a narrative and that's it, no emotion, nothing. People will get bored and walk away. The other thing is if you're, like, for example, I'm going to give an example from my book. One of the things I dealt with was a general officer investigation that happened at my group when I was a group commander. And it was from one of my guys, and it was regarding the Air Force promotion system and the assignment of a promotion recommendation form. And because he filed an IG complaint, and it was based on what happened before I showed up, it was the previous commander, but since I was there, I was responsible and what have you. So a brigadier general showed up and did a full-blown investigation. So part of my challenge for that chapter was that I needed to make the Air Force officer performance report and promotion recommendation form and promotion cycles and UCMJ, all of that stuff, understandable to a general audience. And you can do that. I did that, and I had people look at it who were not military to make sure it was understandable. And they found that chapter really interesting. In fact, they appreciated the education, because nobody knows about how the Air Force promotes their people unless you're in the Air Force. And so, so to answer the question, how do you know that your personal story is going to be of interest? You can make your personal story interesting. Anyone here can make their personal story interesting, and where people will want to read your memoir. And the first part of that question was the difference between nonfiction and memoir and fiction, I gather. And a memoir is actually kind of nonfiction. You know, if you're doing a nonfiction that isn't related to you personally, that's different. But a lot of the same skills apply, such as character development and scene setting, and even putting emotion in. If you have characters, if it's you want to describe your emotion, but for your other characters too, talk about what they're feeling. Talk about what the scene it looks like. Talk about just as if you're storytelling to somebody, you're going to include all of these types of things, and that will make your book interesting as well. And then fiction is kind of a different animal. Still the same thing. You need to make your characters interesting. You need to set the scene. One of the things that was emphasized to me, I took a writing course as well, just to make sure that that I was on track with much of what I was doing. And one of the things that was emphasized to me and everybody in the class was that you need to do your research. If you're doing like historical fiction, you need to make sure that what you're saying is correct, because if you make a mistake, and especially if it's an obvious mistake and it's apparent to the reader, then you lose credibility, and that can really kill you as an author. So so don't worry about your story being interesting. I'm sure it is. It's with with application of some good writing techniques and having it organized and having it themed and what have you, your book can be fantastic.
Okay, so another question is, where do you spend time writing? At home, traveling, other places you found comfortable or convenient for writing? Was there any particular notable places?
Typically, I do it at home. I have a space where I am right now. Here I am. I have a desk, and I have my writing materials, and I have my laptop, and my wife Joanne understands this completely, and every week at least I sit down and shut my door, and for several hours I will be writing. So I do it at home. If I travel, I don't know how much traveling is going on these days, but you can do it anywhere. You don't have to be at home, but the key is if you do it someplace that's familiar and that triggers the writing response. That's part of the reason that listening to alpha wave music is important, because once you get used to writing, listening to that type of music, if you listen to the same soundtrack, you go instantly into that that stage, that mindset. So, if you can do that in different places, if you can clear the distractions and plug into music or whatever you do to be able to focus, that's fine too. You don't have to do it that way, the way I described, but it's important to isolate yourself, get away from distractions. Otherwise, what you're writing is not going to be really useful.
Thanks, Bruce. So Tom Wing has not a question, but he mentioned that the Southern California conference you mentioned he attends as well. The fall conference has been canceled, but the February one will be virtual. So that's just information for anybody else that's out in California.
Oh, cool. Good. That's good to know. Thank you. And for those who want to go to that, I enjoyed the heck out of it. It was great. They're wonderful people, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. I kind of focused on the business side of things mostly, not because I didn't need the other stuff, but because I wanted some feedback on how I'm starting my own business. How do I do this? What should I be aware of? Things like that. Anyway, go ahead, Tom.
Sure. So another question James Kendall has, you specialize in memoirs. I'm writing a historical fiction novel. Would that fit in with your retreat?
Absolutely. So let me tell you, I've got people, I certainly have people writing memoirs. I have a woman who's writing about, and this is kind of a memoir, but it's all based on her husband's battle with brain cancer. He came down with stage 4 brain cancer, and she's writing about that journey. I'm working with a guy, he happens to be an Air Force veteran, who is writing a baseball-themed reference book. And I'm working with him on how to make it more interesting and to put himself more into it. But I can help. I am helping him with that. He's really appreciative of the feedback I'm getting in order to make, I mean, his book is something of a reference book, but it's also, there are stories in it. And it's important to do backstories. So it's important to show a human side. And it's important to include yourself in whatever you're writing, even if it's just up at the front to explain who you are and why you're doing this project. So yeah, absolutely. That plays into this, and that type of thing is really fascinating.
Right. So Paula Philbin has just an observation. She says, Bruce and everyone here, I've taught high school, junior high, undergrad, and grad levels, and I've always encouraged students to read memoirs, especially people other than presidents, generals, and politicians. And she's just encouraging everyone to write, because I cannot tell you how much students wind up really enjoying what the average person has to say and experience. And these memoirs generate great class discussions and work to pique student interest in the period. So just some encouragement there. And hold on, I got another question here. Let's see. So Pat Naughton mentions, how do you advertise so people know about how they can find your book when you self-publish?
So some things I've done, and good question, thank you. I do have a Facebook page, Aimpoint LLC on Facebook. I also have a website, www.colonelbrucehurd.com. And again, it's all the same, colbrucehurd.com. One of the things I did, apart from doing those things, which kind of one would expect to be done, is that I reached out to, for example, I did some research and excuse me one second. I did some research and found the top 10 veterans websites in the United States. And I reached out to the owner of those top 10 sites, the moderator, so I had 10 emails describing myself, showing I have some clips of me speaking at an event in Las Vegas, and some other, and I have a clip of me speaking at a book signing as well. So I had links to those. I sent them to the points of contact. That's probably a better term for these podcasts, and offering myself, if they have an opening, that I would love to come on their podcast. And there was a gentleman, a Marine by the name of Chris Albert, who runs a website called Warrior Soul, and is primarily oriented to Army and Marine veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's kind of a healing process. It's a wonderful website. And he got me on for an hour interview one day, and it was well received. And I have a couple of Marines who are coming to my next retreat in October. So there are ways to do it. I reached out via email. I've created and kept up my website, and I have a Facebook page as well that I communicate with people. So it's not as robust as other places, but it works. And I do have an ongoing low budget contract with a Twitter company that sends out advertisements for my book, and I've gotten some response from them as well. So there are things that I'm doing. I would like to ramp it up. It's I here at Bruce Hurd Incorporated, I don't have a huge budget for this type of thing, but but it's working. There are ways to get the word out, and I'm still working on that.
Thanks, Bruce. Okay, so we got a couple more questions. One is, my stories, which are already partially written, involve patients at their very most vulnerable moments. Although I have a code book for all the actual names, I've taken great care to use very different names and places for the locations. I fear someone would recognize themselves in my very poignant stories about my experience as a military nurse in a deployed setting. Do you have any advice?
I absolutely do, and thanks. That's another wonderful question. Dealing with all of our lives are not all sunshine and roses. Things go wrong. There are times when, obviously in certain circumstances, like for example, as I was writing about my mother, I had to include her real name. It would have been ridiculous for me not to include my mom's real name. And in fact, as I was writing about my ex-wife, I had her first name. It would have been ridiculous for me to have someone else's name there. I didn't include her last name, of course. No need to do that, obviously. And I made a point of writing about her empathetically. Long story there. You can read it in the book. There are other people who there's different ways to address people who you might be writing about that may reflect on them negatively. And for example, in my book, I talk about my experience at pilot training, and that an amazing event, very intense, and I got off to a rough start in pilot training, largely because I had an instructor. I was his first student ever, and he was just a terrible instructor. And I know that sounds like an excuse, but after I failed my, and it is an excuse, it's a good excuse, but after I failed my my very first check ride, the one where they wash everybody out, the regular instructors in the flight, this guy was a guest instructor, came and asked me about how I did things, and I was all messed up. Stuff I didn't learn, stuff I learned wrong, all this stuff. So as I'm describing that experience, the options are, do I include this guy's name, or do I refer to him as the flight instructor or the major or something? And what I chose to do was just call him the major. And then it was apparent who I was talking about, because there's a lot of majors in the Air Force. No one's going to trace it back to this guy, but I did not want to use his name. No need to use his name about this stuff. There may have been other stuff going on that I wasn't aware of, but that's one way to do it. Another way is, like for my 6th grade teacher, the one I referred to earlier, I made up a name for him. I just call him Mr. Smith, because some of the people that would be reading my book I know would know who I was talking about. And again, no need to identify this person and shame him in my book, even though he was a complete jerk. So I just made up a name. That's the only person I made up a name for in my book, and I actually identified it. I said Mr. Smith, and then I said not his real name. So you can refer to people generically or descriptively, you know, kind of the man with a hat or something like that, or just make up a name. That's good. If you make up a name, I would suggest that you identify it as a made-up name, simply because there may be someone with that real name, with that as their real name, and then you're all of a sudden tagging someone with something that they didn't do. So, but it's important to talk about people and things and events that were not positive in your life, just as much as it's important to talk about the positive stuff.
So Bruce, you also mentioned you have your book's about 200 pages, 40 chapters.
284.
So that's about 6 pages a chapter.
I think if you do the math, yeah, I didn't actually.
It just doesn't sound that daunting. You know, you think of a book, 280 pages. How am I going to write a book of 280 pages? And when you do the math, it's like, okay, I could do a chapter, a snapshot each one. Makes it a little more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that my average chapter is probably more like 5 pages, because the last section of the book is, for example, the appendix that does my timeline. That's not really, you know, I wrote it and I have interesting bits in there, but it's not part of the story that I'm telling. And the aim point chapters where I talk about the different principles, like for example, one of the principles is integrity. And since I have a whole section on my book in integrity, I just kind of referenced that. So that one I think is like maybe 1.5 pages. So they vary. There's, but your point's a good one, Tom, in that your chapters don't have to be these lengthy. I mean, they can be whatever you want, but they don't have to be these lengthy, intertwined, complicated narratives. I think, you know, as I think about it and I get a feel for it, I would guess that most of my chapters are 4 or 5 pages. Some go a little bit longer. Some are even shorter. It just, you know, it's enough to be able to tell the story, talk about what you learned from it, talk about what the reader should get out of it, which is usually the same type of thing. And then you move on to the next thing. And it's good to have a transition between what you just wrote and what's coming up on the next chapter as well. But it depends. You don't want to be too formulaic.
Okay. And one last question was, basically, can you go over the 4 reasons for writing again, briefly?
So the 4 reasons for writing. One is self-confidence. Doing that helps increase your self-confidence enormously. I mean, I'm very proud of what I wrote. You know, I have a chapter here on my desk. This is my book. This is what I wrote. And by God, it's physical. It's me. It's got a picture of me on the back just to prove it. And there's a lot of self-confidence that comes from that, not just having a physical book, but also being able to put my thoughts on paper in a coherent way that people enjoy. I've gotten a lot of good feedback about this from people who I haven't talked with in decades. They've found me out on Facebook, and I did one writing retreat in the Bay Area where I grew up, and a lot of high school and college friends came out, and it was wonderful to have a little mini reunion with all of them at the Barnes & Noble in San Jose. I mean, it was just great. That helps build self-confidence. And if you can write a book and publish it, and if you're going to write a book and publish it, you obviously want it to be complete and well written and something you can be proud of. If you can do all that, that is amazing. That is such an accomplishment. So that's one. The other one is credibility. Credibility. If you write a book, even if it's just the credibility of having written a book, as you move on to other things in your life, even credibility within your family, the fact that you wrote a book, people look at you differently. People look at you as someone who is accomplished. And that's something really special as well. And let's see what I got my note here. I'm losing my, anyway, credibility, confidence. Oh, service, being of service to others. That's important too. And that was something that I wanted to, to do as part of my book writing. I wanted to write something that people could read and to be able to perhaps see themselves in my situation and maybe explore their own traumas in their life and what can they learn from it. And that has helped me. I've gotten some really positive feedback on that. And that's part of the reason why I've been reaching out to veterans groups too. I'm hoping to be of service. And then the final one, and I talked at length about that, was therapy. That was the final one. The final of the 4 that I highlighted, there's actually more than that. Most of the others are related to a business, like you're creating content for your content marketing and things like that. And you're educating yourself, especially if you're doing research. You're learning more, makes you more of an expert, and that's all part of your book writing process. Tom, you're on mute.
Sometimes the keys don't work.
No, go ahead.
So look, thank you very much. And your book, Aim Point, can be found on Amazon?
It can be found at Amazon. It's also on Barnes & Noble, and it's a lot of different places. And that's an interesting part of the whole publishing process, is that Amazon lives in its own world, and then everybody else is kind of in their world. And so I published it on both channels to be able to have it available to whoever. And it's in hardcover, it's paperback, it's ebook as well, Kindle ebook, and then it's also audiobook if you're interested in that. Great. I have all those.
Well, look, thank you very much. Thank you for coming to the members of the Army and Navy Club of Washington, D.C. Really appreciate it, because I think there's a lot of great information here. I think it's on a lot of people's minds, judging from both, when Bob Sorley came and talked, and you really laid it out very clearly. I really appreciate it. And, I may see you on a Zoom conference sometime.
I look forward to that, and so wonderful for you to give me this opportunity. This is fantastic, and I hope I have a chance to hear from many more of you. I look forward to it, and regardless or not, I wish you all the very best. And it's been a real pleasure. I enjoyed this. I hopefully that all came across. I did. I love talking about it. So, thank you.
And I really appreciate it. It's been great. Thank you so much, and thanks, to Bob for recommending Bruce. If you have recommendations and if anybody you'd like to hear or speak, send me an email, foxconnorsociety, one word, @gmail.com, and we'll see if we can get them on board. But Bruce, thank you very much. There's obviously a big need, and I can see a lot of, like I said, it struck a chord to me too. So thank you very much, and thank everyone for joining us.
I look forward to talking with you guys. Look forward to talking with you, Tom. Thank you so much.
We'll see you, Bruce.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.